pose a scenario. You are a young, college-age woman in the 90s. Because it's the 90s, a serial killer has been tormenting your college campus, and your roommate was the latest victim. You're spiraling. Your social life's in shambles, your mental health is a wreck, your grades are slacking. You know you need to get the hell out of your campus right now. It's a bit before Thanksgiving break, but you'd like to get home as soon as possible. Noticing your plight, an older male stranger decides to offer you a ride home. He says he can drive you, but you'll have to leave at sunset, driving through complete darkness for over 5 hours just with him. Keep in mind, you've never met him before, and this is the first time you're ever interacting. You also suffer from occasional hyper-realistic hallucinations that cause you to live through an entire episode of events that feel incredibly lifelike but don't ever happen, prompting you to live in a constant state of questioning your reality. Now, do you politely decline his offer? You don't know him, and with a serial killer on the loose, you'd prefer not to get into cars with complete strangers, much less tell them where you live. Tell him that his offer is incredibly kind, but you can find another way to get home. You'll just wait a few days until Thanksgiving break and go home with some fellow students. Say no. Stay a couple of nights off campus or with your boyfriend instead. You'll be safer from the potential crime scene, and you can figure out transportation in the meantime. Or, agree without hesitation and let the stranger know where you live. Get into his car at sunset while you actively fight off hallucinations and willingly trust this older male stranger. I mean, beggars can't be choosers. Now, if you chose any answer other than D, congrats. You chose a path that a normal human woman would choose. You get home safely and manage to get the help that you need. If you chose D, I think you either have no sense of self-preservation, have a penchant for getting murdered, or are a man. Unfortunately for us, the actual book containing this scenario goes with choice D. Welcome to Survive the Night by Riley Sager.
Okay, I am going to speed run this book recap because I've tried to film this 3 times already. The first time I hated the way it turned out, the second time my video footage was corrupted, and the third time my camera died. So it is just me against the world at this point. If you have any more questions about the book afterwards, go read the Wikipedia page, the book, or just look at the Goodreads reviews that are marked hidden with spoilers. Okay, so our main character, her name is Charlie. Her parents died when she was young. Now she has hallucinations because of it as a coping mechanism. She also has no friends. Well, she has 2. One of them is dead. One is her boyfriend Robbie, and the other one is Maddie. Maddie was her roommate. Maddie was murdered. So her roommate Maddie was murdered by this guy called the campus killer who's killed 3 girls over the past 4 years, and when he kills them, he yanks out one of their teeth. Charlie feels really anxious and guilty because she was the last person to be with Maddie before she died, but they got into a fight, and she abandoned Maddie at this bar, and she turned around while she was leaving, and she saw that Maddie was with this strange guy, but she thought it was a hallucination, so she kept walking. Then the next morning she finds out, oh, Maddie is in fact dead. So now she carries a lot of guilt and shame because of that. Charlie, for most of this book, is anxious and delusional. She very stupidly gets into a car with a complete stranger, as stated in the beginning of this video, gets in his car, has no cautions, no suspicion. She doesn't consider any possibility of him being like a killer. She literally, one of the thoughts that she has is, this man can't be a murderer because he doesn't look like it. Are you dumb, stupid, or both? I was so angry while I read this book because of how stupid Charlie is and how nonsensical every single one of her thoughts is. The pattern of behavior for Charlie is this. She'll have a rational thought, one that makes sense, one that seems really, really normal. She's like, oh, this guy is acting a little weird. He just lied to me about his name and his job. That's suspicious. And then she will delude herself into thinking that it's not suspicious at all, and she'll gaslight herself repeatedly. Reading this book is so infuriating because the entire premise hinges on this main character being dumb as a bag of rocks and getting into a complete stranger's car, agreeing to drive for 6 hours through the middle of the night with him, and having no hesitations whatsoever. She gets in the car, and only then does she start thinking, hey, maybe this guy could be a murderer. Maybe this guy could SA me. Maybe this guy is actually a criminal because he's lied to me about every single part of his identity. There are so many times where the guy driving her, Josh, just gaslights her or lies to her, and she finds out that she's been lied to, and she doesn't do anything about it. She's like, oh no, like, it was just an honest mistake. It is totally okay. I have never been more angry at a main character in my entire life, and I read The Love Hypothesis. The way that Riley Sager writes Charlie and continuously has her delude herself and jump through hoops to try and justify anything that she's doing, I think they could put Riley Sager on the US gymnastics team because of the way that he's making leaps and bounds in logic to justify why Charlie is getting in this car and staying in this car. Charlie has multiple times, I think at least 3, where she can get out of the car and call for help or find somebody to call for help, and she never takes any of those opportunities. Why? Because Sager wants the plot to move in a certain direction. Doesn't matter how nonsensical it is, he just wants it to get from point A to point B. He doesn't care about his characters, he doesn't care about their motivations, he doesn't care that they act stupider than a third grader. Yes, I said stupider, because that is how dumb this book is. At some point in the middle of the book, Charlie finally grasps onto the idea that, hey, maybe this guy is also the guy who's been killing girls on my campus because of how many times he's lied to me and gaslit me. And then what does she do? She's like, I'm gonna become, and I quote, a fucking femme fatale. She has this epiphany in a diner bathroom on the side of the road. If you have that kind of thought, you need to be checked into a psych ward. I'm so serious. Something is wrong with you. That is not a logical pattern of behavior or thought, especially for a girl who is as anxious and paranoid as Charlie is. I don't understand why this main character is suddenly deciding to go sicko mode on this guy when all she's done for the entire book is be delusional, anxious, and stupid. After the diner scene where she has that epiphany and they're being served by a waitress named Marge, Josh tells her, okay, we're gonna get back in the car now, let's go. She's like, I'm gonna make him pay. How? I don't know. I have no plan, no thoughts, head empty, but I'm gonna make him pay somehow. When they stop on the side of the road, she tries to get into the driver's seat. Josh notices, she stabs him with a knife from the diner, and then she runs off into the distance. While she's running off, Josh suddenly decides to manic pixie dream girl her and call her like weird and wounded, but secretly fierce. Hey, maybe you should focus on the knife in your gut instead of romanticizing the girl who just did that to you. Anyways, Charlie runs back to the diner. She's like, I need help. Marge is like, surprise, and then she chloroforms her. Marge turns out to be Maddie's grandmother. Marge hired Josh, who turns out to be a hitman. Marge wanted to hire Josh to kidnap Charlie so that she could get the answers out of her as to who killed Maddie. Then Marge takes her to her car. Robbie is also there because Charlie finally had enough sense to call him at that diner before all of that femme fatale stuff happened. Robbie's there. He follows Marge and Charlie into the woods to an abandoned mountain lodge. Josh is also following them, so it's like a little 3-car train into the woods. Then Marge ties her up, decides to play DIY dentist with a pair of rusty pliers to try and yank out Charlie's teeth if she doesn't tell her who the murderer is. Charlie's freaking out because, see, she genuinely does not know. Then Josh shows up. He cuts Charlie's bonds. Then Marge gets pissed and tries to shoot him. Charlie's running through the house. The house is on fire. Charlie runs outside. Then she has a hallucination of Maddie. And then, in dialogue that could rival a third grader's, Charlie manages to forgive herself with the permission of Maddie's hallucination. Then she fights with Marge. She gets the better of her. Robbie clubs Marge against the back of the head. And then Marge is like, you know what? Just kill me. Just shoot me. And then Charlie's like, that's not what Maddie would have wanted. And then Marge just sits there. Robbie takes Charlie and they run back to his car. She's like, I need to go. I can't believe what just happened to me. And then she looks in the car. There's a little engagement ring box. And she's like, oh, you didn't have to. Robbie's like, oh, that's not. But then she opens the box and there's 3 teeth in there. Oh, yep, that's right. Robbie is the campus killer. Robbie, her boyfriend, just murdered those 3 girls. His reasoning as to why, they were too loud and they wanted to be special, which I did have some reservations about because I was like, that's really dumb. But then I thought about it a little more and I was like, men have done a lot more for a lot less. So maybe that is a little realistic. I don't know. Charlie at this point, mad as hell. Jesus, take the wheel. She is fully pedal to the metal down the highway. And then she crashes the car into a river to try to kill Robbie. She tries to get out. Robbie tries to drown her. While Robbie is trying to drown her, she handcuffs him to the steering wheel so that he goes down with the car. She swims out of the car. Oh, not before she takes the pliers and yanks out one of Robbie's teeth. Then she climbs out of the river and she gives the tooth to Marge in the hospital. The end. Not quite, actually, because there's one more chapter at the end of the book where we find out that the events of the book are actually this movie version of Charlie's life. So they have been dramatized or some parts have been exaggerated, but most of it is still true. And we get the scene of Charlie watching the movie and she's mulling over the events of her life. And then we get this incredible passage. Then there's the fact that she likes this version of Josh. It's the one she got brief glimpses of during the long, strange trip of the previous night. Now that all suspicion is gone, she thinks it might be nice to meet the real him. But the bedrock truth is that surviving the night has left Charlie feeling lonelier than ever. Maddie's gone. Robbie too. Now more than ever, Charlie's in need of a new friend. Maybe, she says as she stuffs the keys into her coat pocket. As long as I get to pick the movie. If you're thinking, is this going where I think it's going? Yes. Reader, she marries him. She marries Josh. The one who kidnapped her, tried to kill her, gaslit her, tried to kill her, continuously put her through mental anguish on this car ride, tried to kill her. I don't know if I mentioned it before. Tried to kill her. She marries him. This book is horrendous. It's a travesty, and it's a crime against literature.
After this scintillating synopsis, you might be thinking, how would this ever happen? How would any sane woman get into a car with a male stranger and drive hundreds of miles in multiple hours with him through the night after your best friend was just murdered? I am a young college-age woman, and I would rather die than do that. My friends are young college-age women, and they would also rather die than do that. I think any young college-age woman would rather die than do that, but I guess the woman that Riley Sager interacts with would. And I think I need to make them because I'm genuinely concerned for their well-being and sanity. In case you haven't gathered by now, Riley Sager is not a woman. His name isn't even Riley, it's Todd. I know you might be clutching your pearls right now or keeling over in shock because what part of young woman gets into car with male stranger while potential murder threat hangs over her head doesn't scream written by a woman to you? One of the greatest things that irks me in this world is men writing women. Now, women can also write men very badly, but traditionally, the literary canon has been saturated by male authors writing male main characters, and women have been reading these stories and studying them and understanding how to write realistic male characters. Of course, not all men fail either. I've read many books where a man can write a compelling female character. I'm just saying, more often than not, they fail. and this book is no exception. Charlie flails through the events of this book, Sager taking leaps, bounds, interdimensional teleportations to a universe where her logic makes sense. The constant over-explaining of every single one of Charlie's motives just makes her sound dumber. Charlie gaslights herself so much in this book that if you pressed your nose to the pages, you'd die from carbon monoxide poisoning. Her character development occurs at the drop of a hat. Suddenly, she's a femme fatale, the sentiment that emerges from your mouth after you've taken too much acid or gone through a psychotic break, not in the middle of a life-threatening encounter on the side of the highway. Sager claims to write strong female characters, yet this book doesn't shatter any glass ceilings. In fact, it might be reshingling the roof. The writing sets back women about 100 years. Actually, maybe 1,000, because Charlie ignores every single survival instinct to the point where a Mesozoic dinosaur would probably have better self-preservation instincts than her. If you listen closely, you can hear Agatha Christie actively rolling in her grave. And yet, this is the kind of writing that gets you on the New York Times bestseller list, people. I know I'm being excessive, and contrary to my demeanor, I'm not mad at Todd, per se. I'm mad at what he represents. This book is part of a larger trend in publishing, male authors using androgynous pseudonyms to gain larger market appeal. Let me read you some names. A.J. Finn, A.B. Whelan, Grady Hendrix, Alex Finlay, Greer Hendricks, S.J. Watson, A.R. Tora, J.P. Delaney, B.A. Paris, S.K. Tremaine. 4 of those names are female authors. Take your best guess at which ones. Male thriller authors have taken on pseudonyms to hide their gender while publishing thrillers about women, and received enormous amounts of success because of it. A.J. Finn's The Woman in the Window was released as a Netflix film. J.P. Delaney's The Girl Before was adapted into a TV show. Most of these authors have ended up on the New York Times bestsellers list, selling thousands of copies and continuing to publish more and more books. The name is not the problem here. Pseudonyms and pen names and nicknames and abbreviations are not hate crimes waiting to happen or cancelable offenses. It's not the action, it's the principle of the situation. The contents of this book scream written by a man, but if you see the spine on an unassuming Barnes & Noble shelf, you'll be none the wiser. Very few readers will go out of their way to research the author of the book that they're picking up. They're just looking for a casual read. Adopting an androgynous pen name provides an escape route for male authors. Sure, he can say he's not actively pretending to be a woman, but it definitely wouldn't hurt if people thought he was. If we uplift female voices, and they end up writing a realistic woman, people will think that they're a woman, their sales will skyrocket, etc., etc. And if they end up actually writing a really terrible book, well, they weren't actively pretending to be a woman. Honestly, how do you write under an ambiguous pen name and still manage to fail at writing a realistic woman? I mean, isn't the whole point of changing your name so that you can write these stories and readers can believe that a woman wrote them? If you write a woman who's dumber than a bag of rocks, you honestly might as well just go by Todd again. This to me indicates an anxiety about an inherent inability to portray women. The more unsure you are of the accuracy of your portrayal, the more likely you are to create a scapegoat to hide behind. Take away the pen name and you just have a main character who could blow off in the wind because of how two-dimensional they are. Slapping on a label without doing any research or putting in any effort to create a genuine female character is just inauthentic and leads to subpar work. The stakes are high for male writers not to make mistakes that female readers would catch. S.J. Watson, Steve Watson, tried on a bra in his office while writing his 2011 bestseller Before I Go to Sleep. The book refers to the undergarment at least 7 times. If he had messed up a reference to bra mechanics, he said, his mother, one of his first readers, would have told him. Steve, wonderful job. You put on a bra. You did the work. Centuries ago, women were often writing under male names because of the fear that they would not be accepted into the literary community if they were publishing under their real name. Now we've gotten to the point where male authors will write under androgynous pseudonyms for profit. Typical. But this issue is derived from a larger genre-wide trend. Male authors are adopting pseudonyms because they are clamoring to pen thrillers with girls at the center of it, often dead. Male voices for female stories. What's with the dead girl obsession anyway? The death of a beautiful woman is, unquestionably, the most poetical topic in the world. Even when I am not writing about the dead girl, I am writing about the dead girl. Even when the girl in the poem is alive, she is dead, and I am writing about a time when she wasn't. The thriller genre is a supposed anomaly in the world of male-dominated industries. Here is where girl stories thrive, where so many female-motivated stories blossom. Fueled by the rise of Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, the thriller genre soon turned towards girl thrillers. The Girl on the Train, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Woman in the Window, Pretty Girls, The Broken Girls, Reckless Girls, Invisible Girl, The Burning Girls, An Anonymous Girl, Final Girls, The Final Girl Support Group, Rebecca, Carrie, Misery, All the Missing Girls, The Good Girl, The Girl Before, The It Girl. It's all girls and girls and girls. The intangible figure flung from the 13th story or bludgeoned in an alley. The reluctantly curious bystander muddling through a murder, picking at threads until she comes face to face with a villain or herself, sometimes both. The rise of the girl thriller has resulted in male authors jumping on the trend, both with and without pseudonyms. But the male voice often fails to capture the core of female suffering, describing images of tormented minds or bruised bodies that feel all too familiar, but with none of the heart or story behind any of that pain. In her article, The Blank Page and the Issues of Female Creativity, Susan Gubar describes the utilization of the female body as a canvas by male authors. Authors participate in a long tradition identifying the author as a male who is primary and the female as his passive creation, a secondary object lacking autonomy, endowed with often contradictory meaning but denied intentionality. The male author imbues meaning on the blank page of the woman, viewing her as a project to manipulate, stripping from her the ability to invent herself. He concocts his own narrative about how she moves through the world. And what better blank page than a dead girl, a body that cannot move or speak or act anymore, a mannequin waiting for someone to dress up her life. From her, mythos sprouts, inventions of past trauma and hidden secrets, conspiracy theories and angry lovers. See here Fridging, or Women in Refrigerators, derived from a Green Lantern comic book where the main character comes home to find his murdered girlfriend shoved into a refrigerator. The trope refers to killing off or seriously injuring a woman simply to motivate and advance the characterization of the male main character. A dead girl can kick a movie into gear better than a saloon brawl, better than a factory explosion, just by lying there. In her essay collection, Dead Girls, Alice Bolin writes about the idea of the dead girl, the pure, blameless victim that kickstarts a mystery, an obsession with the absence that she has left. Bolin explores the dead girl show, describing how easy it is to reach into the concept of the dead girl and pull out a narrative of a perfect victim, a hero's journey, a fight for justice. This is easy for the dead girl, as to achieve that seductive conclusion, the story must be over before it begins. On this point, Bolin also writes powerfully that though the genre may appear, on its face, to be about women, it is in fact usually about the numb and senseless actions of men. The dead girl is rarely a real human being with a real life and real complexity. She is an empty cipher upon which men can work out their complicated feelings about masculinity. The male voice puppets her throughout the story, letting others find footing on her cold flesh or passion from her blue lips. We hold a collective passion for dead girl fiction, mutilated or missing, plagued by visions or skeletons in her closet, her misery the pulpy heart of the throbbing novel. Her cold body is deified, idolized, sanctified, an innocent thing for the story to hinge on. Her suffering made her beautiful, and her pain made her her. She represents metamorphosis, purity, regret, hope. She lays splayed out, waiting for you to brand meaning on her skin. Exploiting women's pain to spice up a story is selfish, lazy, and unoriginal. We've seen enough of the constant misery of women. We live it every day, and hearing it simplified and tooled around by the mouth of someone who hasn't lived it reduces it to a cruel literary stunt. You can't plaster your main character with pain and hope it makes her real. Male authors aren't necessarily perpetrating a societal wrong by simply committing themselves to telling women's stories, but they tread a thin line between gimmick and genuine, often sliding into the former. Sager kicks off his story with an almost laughable statement. Because he seems nice, friendly, definitely not the type of guy who'd do the things that had been done to Maddie and the others. Sager is already operating the book on a plane of delusion at this point, doing his main character and her trauma a massive disservice. She's not a 5-year-old girl stumbling through the world with no sense of the dangers that lie ahead. Charlie has suffered. She's lost an unimaginable amount of loved ones, and she knows how brutal the world can be, how cruel any man can be. This isn't something a woman has to discover. It's what she's already taught to do. Don't be the dead girl. Don't walk alone at night. Get in through the passenger seat. Smile at unwanted conversation. Yell fire instead of help. Don't ever trust a stranger. Yet Sager presents this like a triumphant plot twist. Surprise! He speaks as if he is just discovering the through line for all these dead girls. Ordinary men can be monsters. The cardinal rule of authorship is write what you know. But Riley Sager does not know female instinct. He even says this himself. But one of the problems, he says, was how I was going to keep her in this car for such a long period of time and not have readers be like, just jump out of the car, you idiot. Well, you don't keep her in the car. You can't avoid that because it's not how a woman acts, especially one as traumatized as Charlie. You don't write them as blundering idiots with no common sense and heads full of delusion. Many of the reviews for this book lambast Sager's choice to make Charlie say yes to a stranger and hinge his entire novel on an unexplainable action. It's an insult to Charlie and honestly an insult to women. The moment we start talking about wounded women, we risk transforming their suffering from an aspect of the female experience into an element of the female constitution, perhaps its finest, frailest consummation. The ancient Greek Menander once said, "Woman is a pain that never goes away." He probably just meant women were trouble, but his words hold a more sinister suggestion, the possibility that being a woman requires being in pain, that pain is the unending glue and prerequisite of female consciousness. What is extremely disappointing about Sager's writing is that it utilizes female suffering for no other reason other to embellish and dramatize the story. It's as if he thinks it's a prerequisite for existing as a woman, that they must bear the utmost burdens and feel nothing but misery. Charlie's character is threadbare. She likes movies, she has hallucinations, her parents are dead. We get little to no information about her personal life, her classes, her tastes, her personality, and social circle. It's just her pain and her misery. What more could you ask for in a thriller main character? Many of them are practically bursting at the seams with trauma, often haunted by past demons, mental illnesses, or just plain nosiness. They're what make these girl thrillers even more hard-hitting. The dead girl joins the plethora of ghosts taking up residence in the narrator's brain, spinning them into a tornado of angst and anxiety. Charlie is no exception. At the start of this novel, we see how Charlie's parents are dead, her grandmother is on the verge, her roommate is dead, her relationship is on the rocks, her grades are slipping, her social life is dead, she is paranoid, anxious, plagued by hallucinations, and has lost all hope for life. Then Sager throws in the suicide attempt. Dead girl once again. Charlie's attempt is jarring and inconsequential, a flimsy effort at once again explaining why she got into the car, an attempt to juxtapose her ending state of wanting to live. It adds nothing to the story. We already know how paranoid, mentally strained, and stressed she is. It's just tossed in like Sager spun the wheel on tragedy and landed on this one. Even with living girls, their suffering is a decoration. The violence that haunts their life pushes them forward and makes them weird and wounded like a piece of taxidermy. It's unnecessary and gratuitous, a sadness that just seems to pile on. The main character of this book being a woman does not preclude Sager from utilizing Maddie as a canvas for self-discovery and projection. Charlie springboards off of Maddie's death to activate her heroine arc, which would be fine if we knew anything about her in the first place. What do we know about Maddie other than the fact that she's a walking, talking, manic pixie dream girl? Sager describes her as an audacious blonde with a 50s style, a penchant for partying, and a Yankee accent. She's loud, she's out there, and she talks to her grandmother? They've been friends and roommates for 3 years, and this is the most Charlie can muster about her closest friend and confidant, that she carried herself like a movie star and suffered an equally cinematic death. With one oversimplified third-grade writing dialogue conversation, Maddie enables Charlie to unspool the movies in her mind and forgive herself, to drive like hell and drown the boy. She's there and she's gone, and you get the feeling she was never really alive to begin with. This feels akin to Emerald Fennell's Promising Young Women, a film that sounds great until you think about it for more than 2 seconds. In that film, the main character Cassie is motivated to attack men and get revenge because her best friend committed suicide after getting SA'd. We never get to know this friend in any way. We never get to understand her as a person. She is simply the victim that floats in the periphery, serving as fuel for the plot and Cassie's eventual demise. Forever a mortal dead girl, more powerful 6 feet under. Sager makes a jab at the deeper problem of the dead girl as a product of misogyny and patriarchy, But that attempt to write a girl boss main character crashes and burns at that weird BuzzFeed feminism monologue in the diner bathroom. No one tells women that none of it is their fault, that the blame falls squarely on the awful men who do terrible things in the fucked up society that raises them, molds them, makes excuses for them. People don't want to admit that there are monsters in their midst, so the monsters continue to roam free and the cycle of violence and blame continues. So close! This would work if you actually wrote realistic female characters. Who is Sager pandering to here? Women? The ones who know firsthand how dangerous men can be? His writing indicates a want for surface-level politics and flattery, a task in his strong female character writing checklist crossed out. Indicate female strength. It's flat and uninspired, a final grasp at coherence in a book that has done nothing but disservice to its female characters. Sager ultimately fails to draw up a realistic female main character, simply equipping her with pain and hoping she sticks the landing. She doesn't. She marries her kidnapper. How fitting that Charlie ends up with the man who called her weird and wounded and secretly fierce. Charlie's pain shapes her in his eyes. Her hurt is her defining feature. But then we reach a roadblock. Who gets to write about the plight of female suffering? Who gets to arrange their bodies and set the crime scenes and write the eulogies? Who gets to arbitrate the rights to image the dead girl, the damaged girl, the one with a broken limb or broken brain, the one who haunts the narrator in the dead of night, the one whose snapped spine is the foundation of the story, the churning heart beneath every action? Who lays claim to the miserable, suffering, beautiful dead girls? I do think men should be less eager to jump on the womanly pain train. I think that eagerness can be well-meaning, but it can also come from a darker place, one aligned with the idea of the blank canvas. Our culture has become saturated with the image of the dead woman. What are you trying to say with this one? However, limiting the imaging of woman suffering would be foolish. To gatekeep an incredibly common occurrence, one that affects genuinely everyone, would be impossible, and to give up the dead girls would be pointless as well. To write well is to not stop, but to learn from your mistakes and constantly seek out ways of improvement. I think dismissing female pain as overly familiar or somehow out of date, twice told, thrice told, 1001 nights told, masks deeper accusations that suffering women are playing victim, going weak, or choosing self-indulgence over bravery. I think dismissing wounds offers a convenient excuse. No need to struggle with the listening or telling anymore. Plug it up. Like somehow our task is to inhabit the jaded aftermath of terminal self-awareness once the story of all pain has already been told. There will never be an end to girl thrillers, just like there will never be an end to the dead girls, an end to the staging and redressing of their bodies, an end to the stories, both good and bad, of their consequences and impacts. But to aimlessly pen these stories, contorting around the pure canvas of the rotting corpse, attempting to invent some new way she died, some new way she suffered, ignores the greater issue of the dead girl, the thrumming undercurrent of systemic violence fueled by a culture of misogyny and hatred. She died because we killed her. She died because we chose to jump from flawless victim to flawless victim, ignoring the bad, writing our own script. Young, middle-class, white, beautiful, blameless, dead. Our belief in the perfect victim and meek sufferer leads to her undoing. Only by telling these stories with an understanding of that undercurrent can we flesh out the ways female narratives are written and enable men to write fewer stories about dead girls and more stories about the life they held, bringing empathy and nuance and understanding to the pain and the woman behind it. They are not the canvases for your outward projection. They are girls, living, real, complex. We can't see suffering one way. We have to look at it from 13 directions, and that is only the beginning. Then we are called to follow this figure striding out of the light. We follow this figure into contradiction, into a confession that wounds are desired and despised, that they grant power and come at a price, that suffering yields virtue and selfishness, that victimhood is a mix of situation and agency, that pain is the object of representation and also its product, that culture transcribes genuine suffering while naturalizing its symptoms. Sager acknowledges his inspirations towards the end of the book in classic film bro fashion. To the filmmakers whose work inspires me and that I return to again and again, Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles, Billy Wilder, Steven Spielberg, David Fincher, Vincent Minnelli, Wes Craven, Brian De Palma, Walt Disney. Of course, the list is no woman. We have to keep telling these stories until they can't be brushed aside, until they shout as loud as male authors and auteurs, if not louder. We break the system of the dead girl down. Male authors have to talk to women, to read and watch and consume the stories that they write. What are you doing with the body in your hands? What do you want with her pain? To understand the nuances and depth of the dead girl, you have to have listened to her, lived her. You can't just snatch it out of thin air, write it out, and believe it true. No one is saying you can't write her. You just have to hear before you speak. It sounds paradoxical when I say it out loud, that in order to destroy the dead girl, we have to keep writing about her. But every dead girl is both different and the same, and we have to remember it all. Here is her smile. Here is her rage. Here is her favorite color. Here are the height markings penciled in on the doorframe. Here's the vomit stain from her first underage party. Here are the jobs she had and the layoffs that stung. Here are the past and present lovers. Here is how she cared so fiercely, too fiercely, not enough. Here are the chances she took and the ones she didn't. Here's how she did her hair in the morning. Here's the scar she got from falling off of a bike in the 2nd grade. Here's how she liked her eggs. Here's how she yelled at her father until her lungs ached. How she wrote her college essays. How she kissed you when you cried. How she spoke too sharply, hurt your feelings, hurt herself. How she ran away 4 times, took something to take the edge off. How she left the door unlocked, broke your heart, broke the law. Here is how she laughed. Here is how she cried. Here is how she was loud and audacious, silent and meek, outspoken, conformist. She could have been a genius. No, she was a genius. She was marred and scarred and kind and angry. She was still growing, no matter her age. And here is how she died, just like every other girl. It doesn't matter how she went or how close she was to perfect, because that isn't important. She was here and then she wasn't, and she was just another girl. Put a name to a face. This is not a murdered wife home movie or a funeral montage. We are all dead girls, or we will be someday. Don't you want someone to tell it like it was? Don't you want someone to look at you and not need a justification as to why they should care? Bolin writes, "It's clear we love the dead girl, enough to rehash and reproduce her story, to kill her again and again, but not enough to see a pattern. We keep churning out dead girls and pretending their bodies are for us now, like after the hands leave her throat or the knife leaves her gut, we get the final say. We wave her body around in self-discovery or accusation, a convenient tool for scapegoating others or remaking ourselves. We read her body and consume her flesh, watching and scandalizing and mythologizing. Why did she have to die in the first place? Why do we take her as she is, more convenient when she's gone? When we imagine the dead girl, what are you saying to her, about her? When you douse the girl in malaise and drag her out wet and shivering, does she become a limp rag in your hands, something to stumble through your story, dripping with pain? Must she spit in your face to remind you that she is still human? It is not about the pen names or the initials. It is about the girl in the pages with a story to tell and a life to live, if you only have the will to do so. In death, my mother told me once, you become responsible for everything you've ever loved. In life, though, I mainly feel tired. I'm tired of seeing the same bodies again and again and again. I'm tired of every man who's ever undressed me with his eyes, every white woman and white man who've thrown another fictional girl into a pile against the wall. I want to say to all of these bodies, are you even listening to anything we're doing here? I feel too sensitive all the time. We owe the dead everything.